Texas, stories from my life. Texas, stories from my life. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brienne. Well, I got to thinking today about another story from my life. You all know how I love to share my little stories, and they're just little stories, but they're true stories from my life. This one dates back to the late 70s. I was living in California. My mom would come and go from our southern town, and she would come back and forth. And then she decided that she wanted to move to Texas. Well, we had a family friend who was more like family to us. We were very close with this person, more like an aunt to me. And she was from Texas, and she lived in Texas. And she had this great style about her. She was a real estate woman. I just loved being around her because I wanted to be like her. At that young age, I was probably about 20. And so my mom said, I'm going to go to Texas and I'm going to open up an apartment. So she opened up a really nice apartment near where my, quote, aunt lived. And so I flew down there and I would stay quite often. I loved it. That was back when the TV show Dallas was on and oil was booming and real estate was booming. Later it was to bust and then return again. And life has its cycles, real estate cycles, economy cycles, all kinds of things. Life has its cycles. And so anyhow, I moved down there on and off. And throughout the years, I'd kind of come and go. And my mom would kind of come and go from there too. She'd come back to California and then she'd go back to Texas. And I loved Texas. I really, really did. And it was so exciting back then. And I was single, so I dated a couple different guys during that time. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And I have great memories from that time with my mom. I had this amazing mom and I just miss her so much. She passed a few years, about 10 years ago, from Parkinson related issues and ALS type of symptoms, and I took care of her completely, took care of her at the end of her life. And at the last stages, she had to go into a nursing home because she was bedridden to the point that I couldn't take care of her. I had 3 little kids and I would have been housebound and I couldn't do that, but I went constantly to the nursing home 2-3 times a day to be with her, to supervise her care, to feed her, to take care of her, to make sure she was being well taken care of. And so I miss my mom. When my mom was younger and she was strong, she was an amazing woman. She was so amazing. She was always moving somewhere, and so she was always loading stuff in her car and driving across country. My mom always had something waiting on the table for me. When I lived in Newport Beach and I would drive out to Palm Springs where she was living at the time, I would get there, and even if she wasn't there, she was gone for a few hours, and I got there was always food waiting for me on the table. My mom was amazing, and she would let me sleep in her bed when I went out to stay with her, and then she'd sleep on the couch. And she was just, we just had this amazing supportive relationship. And so I truly, truly miss my mother so very, very much. And yet I honor her in so many ways. I made a beautiful collage of photos of her, and I keep it in my bedroom where I can see it often. And so anyhow, my mom and I were down in Texas, and there's no really special story to tell you all about my time in Texas. So this is just sharing my time in Texas. And that kind of went on and off for over a period of about 7 years when my mom was kind of on and off living there. And, I would often stay with my aunt who had all this class and all this style. And I just loved being around her. She was one of these people, I called her Aunt Pat. She had a voice that everybody wanted to emulate. She had a voice mannerism, voice style, voice charisma. And I mean, people just wanted to talk to her so that they could mimic how she spoke. She was the best speaker, one of the best speakers I've ever heard in her daily talk and in any kind of talk. She just had that style about her. And so I hope I have a little bit of that style about me. So yeah, Texas, I love Texas. I did learn to line dance while I was down there. And like I said, I dated a couple different guys while I was down there on and off. And I would fly back and forth to California to Texas to back and forth, just go back and forth. And it was a great time. It was a great time and great memories with my mother. So like I said, there's no special story attached to this, no big event, but it was just a great time of my life. And that was, like I said, back when Dallas was on and it was just starting out and everybody was watching it, and it just gives me good moments to remember my mom, and we just had such a great time. Well, from my house to yours, may God bless you, and I hope to talk to you all soon again. Bye-bye. Learning to drive a motorhome. Learning to drive an RV motorhome. Hello you all, I'm Diana Brienne. Well, I love to share little stories from my life, and here goes another one. This is when I learned to drive a motorhome. Well, years ago we were living down in Texas, and I got the idea of buying a camper. I saw on like a parking lot an old camper for sale for about $3,000. It was kind of junky. So I said to my husband, oh, I want this camper, because I always loved campers and motorhomes, even though I'd never had one. And so my husband went over and looked at it, and he said, no way are we going to buy that piece of junk. But anyhow, in the weeks that were to come, on the weekends, we would have fun. We would take our kids, put them in our 3-road expedition, and away we would go. And we would look at, campers. But then my husband said, no, you know what? I like an RV, a motorhome. And he likes campers. We liked campers too, but he likes to drive. And so we started looking at RVs. Well, he had never even been in one in his life. And before we knew it, we ended up driving to Houston on a Friday, and we bought this great big motorhome, and my husband had to drive it back about 5 hours away. And I am telling you, it was like a bus. It had a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom. It was beautiful. But he had never driven one before, and he was in Houston traffic on a Friday night with construction going on, and the kids and I were following behind him in the car, and I was just terrified. But he did amazing. He does amazing. It's so much. So anyhow, he got the motorhome home, and I had to go down to the DMV to get a license. At that time, if the motorhome was over a certain weight, you needed a truck driver license. So there I went down to the DMV with my 3 little kids at the time, and they were small, and they sat there so proper and so nice while mommy took her test. And I have no idea how I passed it, but I did. It amazed me. I got my, what I call, a truck driver license. So anyhow, well, it was kind of like where you can drive a large vehicle. And so it might not have been exactly a truck driver license, but it was some kind of license that let you drive a very large vehicle. And so my husband at that point began to teach me how to drive this motorhome. So we would take it out, and the kids, were all, buckled in so that they were safe. And we would go into the parking lot, and I would drive around the parking lot. And it was so funny because as I would drive around, I would jam on the brake and I would jerk it, and jam on the brake and jerk it. And that went on what seemed like forever. But gradually I learned to drive it, and I learned to drive it well. Well, we had that motorhome for about a year, and then we sold it and moved back to Georgia. And then for my 50th birthday, I wanted another motorhome. So I found the exact one I wanted. It had a bunk bedroom for the kids with little televisions. It had our bedroom. It had a living room. It had a kitchen. It was wonderful. So my husband bought it for me for my 50th birthday. And we just traveled the country. At that time, I primarily homeschooled, and so my kids were learning as we journeyed. And we went to 48 of the 50 states, and it was just amazing and wonderful. And my favorite trip was Route 66, and we went from one end of Route 66 all the way to the other, and ended up at Disneyland in California. And it was just wonderful, 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 wonderful time of my life. But during that trip, I remember my husband, he wanted to get some sleep, so he went in the back and he fell asleep, on the bed while I was driving. And so I was driving, and I hit a curb. And when I hit the curb, all the dishes fell out of the cupboards onto the floor. And of course, that was actually in kind of a parking lot that I hit the curb, but nonetheless, I didn't make the turn big enough. And so I hit the curb, no damage or anything like that, but I hit the curb and it just knocked all the dishes out. So another time we were going down towards Hoover Dam, and there was all this construction, one lane for about 20 miles. And it was all downhill. So I was driving this big bus, as I called it, motorhome, and I drove about 10 miles an hour, very, very carefully, all the way down the hill, because I was going to be safe. Safety was number one. When I got to the bottom of the hill, there was a huge string of cars behind me. And as they passed me one by one, some of them gave me some really dirty looks, and some of them gave me a few gestures. But I didn't care, because you know what? It was most important that we were safe. And so yeah, I loved having a motorhome. We've had amazing times. And then we sold it because our kids became teenagers, and they had sports activities and things they wanted to do to stay close at home. And so we really weren't traveling much, and so we sold it. So I hope someday I get another motorhome. But yeah, I learned to drive that motorhome. And one of my big accomplishments in life. Another story from my life. May God bless you, and I hope to talk to you all soon again. Bye. The Angel Down the Dark Alley. The Angel Down the Dark Alley. Stories from my life. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brianne. Well, periodically, I like to share a story from my life, and it's just something I enjoy doing. This one's a little more serious, so, just kind of be prepared for it. It's called The Angel Down the Dark Alley. Well, when I was about 20 years old, I was living out in California in the beach area. And I had an apartment, and this is in the 70s. And because, I'm 62 years old and so I'm reflecting back on this. But back then, we didn't have electric garage door openers, at least in the apartment complex that I lived, but they had garage doors. And so we had to pull the garage door down with like a rope. And, it was a rope attached to the inside of the garage, and you pull it down, and it came down, and it would shut. So I was a young nurse, And so it was very common for us to go out in our white nurses' uniforms, because we still wore white nurses' uniforms and caps back then. That was before the changeover in kind of the nursing attire. And so we went, I usually worked the 3 to 11 shift. Back then they had 7 to 3, 3 to 11, and 11 to 7. I don't know if they still do that now or not, because it's been a long, long time since I've worked as a nurse. But anyhow, I was 20, and so 20 or 21. Okay, 20 or 21, but I was a brand new nurse. And so we all went out after the 3 to 11 shift, which we got off at 11:30, and then by the time we got to the disco, and I didn't drink or anything, so, we went out, and probably about 1:30 in the morning, actually quite late. But, you're young and having fun, and you don't think anything can ever happen and all that. So I came home, I was driving home, and my garage was down the dead end part of the alley, so you had to kind of go way in the back and then park. And so I, got out, lifted the garage door up, and I pulled in, turned my car off, got my purse, was in my nurse's uniform, and as I was pulling down the garage door with a rope, suddenly I felt myself thrust forcefully to the ground, and there was gravel on the ground, and all of a sudden I felt something sharp against my neck, and someone hitting my head and kind of grinding it into the gravel. And I knew I was in trouble, and I looked up, and there were 3 young adult men, and it was very, very scary, extremely scary for me. And I don't know what their intention was. I have no idea. I just know it wasn't good. And I remembered my grandmother always taught me to call on the name of Jesus. And I didn't say God, God, please help me. I said, Jesus, please help me. And within a moment, I heard this noise. And around the corner, this dead-end alley at 1:30 at night that no one goes down, comes this old roaring car. It was an old car. Came roaring down where I was. And the man got out, an old man got out and shook his stick. And those guys got up and ran. And I got myself up off the ground. And when I got myself up off the ground, because I wasn't sure if it was safe enough to do so, that man was gone. That old man was gone. The car was gone. And I took off running to my apartment. My uniform was ripped, but fortunately I was okay. I was all in one piece. I was okay. And I ran into my apartment, and of course we called the police and all that, made a report. And later, a couple weeks later, I heard some guy, I lived in an upstairs apartment, and I was awake in the middle of the night, and I heard some conversation outside my window. And I looked out, and it was those guys. They didn't know I lived in that apartment. They were out there canvassing the area, waiting for their next victim to come around the corner. So lo and behold, I called the police, and when the sirens came, they took off running, and I took off. I was in my nightgown, and the balcony's all connected, so I was running down the balcony, chasing them. I can't believe I had the nerve to chase them, but I think I was so mad at what they tried to do to me, and probably what they were trying to do to someone else. And so when the police came, these guys had actually ran into an apartment. They were actually living there in someone else's apartment. And so I can't remember that far back, but I had to go identify everything, and it was a process. And nothing really ever happened to those guys. Somehow they got off, and they took off, and I don't even know if they were ever really found after that, because they were not arrested that particular night, because the incident that happened to me had not happened that night. It had happened a couple weeks before. And this is back in the 70s, and things were very different back then. And But I remember I moved out of that apartment. Oh gosh, I moved out of that apartment shortly thereafter because I could not sleep. And I was pretty traumatized. If anyone approached me too quickly or I heard a loud noise, I would just kind of jump back. And for about 2 years, kind of a PTSD type of thing. And so, but I was okay. I was okay. And I learned a valuable lesson not to go down dark alleys or go where I do not belong, especially at late night or times of the day that I should not be. And so I'm very guarded about the places I go. And I think before I go someplace, I don't go isolated places. Not at all. And so it really made me very alert going forward in my life, which is probably a very, very good thing. But I always think that that man in that old smoking car that came down that alley at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning was an angel. I really do believe that. I really believe when I called on the name of Jesus and that car came around the corner. It couldn't have been at a more perfect time. And like I said, nobody came down that alley anyhow, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I was very grateful. So that's a story from my life, and I thought I would share it with you. I like to share my little stories. Some of them are funny. I have a lot of funny ones too, okay? From my house to yours, please subscribe to my YouTube page here, and I hope to talk to you soon. Drag queens and Newport Beach, stories from my life. Drag queens and Newport Beach, stories from my life. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brianne. And, I love to tell little stories from my life, and I often tell little stories from my life. And this one's kind of a funny one. Well, I had been living in California, and I had been living between LA, Palm Springs, but I had come out of a broken romance, and I wanted to kind of start fresh and new. And I was living in Palm Springs at the time. And so I decided that I was going to move to Newport Beach. The issue was, though, I didn't know a soul in Newport Beach, but I knew I wanted to live there. I loved Newport Beach, and I loved the thought of living in Newport Beach. I was young, I was single, and I was going to go back to college. So my money needed to be conserved because I didn't plan on working very much during that time. So I needed someplace affordable. And I decided rather than try to rent an apartment, which was extremely expensive in Newport Beach, I decided that instead what I would do would be I would go ahead and just find a roommate situation. So back then in the 80s, we didn't have the internet or, to surf the web to find roommates. And we had the newspaper. And so I checked out several different places. I had gone down there for the day. I hadn't moved there yet. And I needed to find a place because I was starting school. And so by the end of the day, I was going to check one more place out that I had found through the newspaper. And so I went down this side road, and there was an old car, an older car, not an old one, but an older car, kind of covered with leaves. But the house looked nice. And so I thought, okay, I knocked on the door, and a very nice, younger, middle-aged man came to the door, greeted me, very friendly, very nice, very professional. And I didn't really have any red flags going up at that particular point. And so, long story short, there were other women that were living in the house. He rented out rooms only to women and only to beautiful women. I was to find out later. At least that's what I was told. And he often booted women out, especially if they had a boyfriend. I was to find that out later too. I didn't know any of this at the time. So I gave him my deposit and the first month's rent and everything like that. And I headed back for Palm Springs, put all my furniture in storage, and I brought back with me my personal effects. And so my car was filled to the top. And when I got there, I was carrying my belongings into the house, and one of the roommates was moving out, and she was with her boyfriend, and she stared at me, and she looked at me directly in my eyes, and she said, "Get out of here fast." Well, that sent chills up and down me, and I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know exactly what it was. She was later to call me once I had my phone connected up. I can't remember how she got my number, but she did. And she called me, and she told me a bit more details that he really, he rented rooms in order to find a girlfriend. And if, we weren't interested in him, then he booted us out. Well, over the next couple of weeks, all of the other women moved out. So it was just me living there. And, I was very nice with him and he was very nice to me, but he became more and more possessive. My mother came to visit me. He was overly attentive to my mother, put house slippers on her feet and, just babied her, which was nice. She liked that, but it was over the top. And I knew it was over the top. Everything he did was kind of over the top. I noticed like my undergarments was starting to be missing. I noticed that my phone felt like it was tapped, like somebody had tapped into it, that my belongings had been gone through even though my door was locked. And I just became increasingly uncomfortable. And I started to date several different guys while I was down there, just casually dating. But he became very possessive of me and very upset over the fact that I was dating. And so it just became more alarming to me, and I needed to get moved out of there. I was dating a pilot, and the pilot took me over to the airlines that he worked at, and on the bulletin board was roommate wanted ads. So I called on a couple of them, but I only checked out one, and it was fabulous. It was an airline stewardess, an airline flight attendant, and two other roommates that lived there on the beach in a beautiful beach apartment overlooking the water. And so they, accepted me right away, and I paid them my deposit. And then I had to figure out how I was going to get out of where I was and over to here. So in the meantime, kind of backwards a little bit, the little fun part of this story is one night I woke up in the middle of the night to the music of the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees was playing really loud downstairs. I opened up my door crack to see what was going on, and I saw the man who owned the house dancing in his underwear to the Bee Gees downstairs with a great big heavy set drag queen with a pink wig. And the drag queen turned out to be the taxi cab driver. And they were just having a rip-roaring time. All due respect to drag queens, okay? I've known a couple of them, and they've been wonderful, wonderful people. So this one was just a heavy set one, dancing to the Bee Gees, and they were having a really, really great time. And so now whenever I hear the Bee Gees, I think it's Staying Alive. I always think of that time. And I think about it, with laughter in my heart. But at the time, I wasn't laughing very hard. So a couple of days after that is when I moved. And what I basically did was I had to sneak out in the middle of the night about 3 o'clock in the morning after he finished drinking and got drunk and fell asleep. And the problem was he had a dog. I didn't want to wake the dog up. And the steps going down squeaked. So I had to step over steps, carrying my belongings, carrying my TV, carrying everything, not to wake anyone up because I didn't know how he would react. So anyhow, I got moved out of there. I went to school the next day, and then I moved into the apartment with my new roommates. And I only saw him one time after that, and it was at the post office, and I just kind of took off the other way, and that was it. But I'll never forget the drag queen, the Bee Gees music, and him dancing in his underwear. And so I moved in with these new roommates. They were fantastic. They knew how to have a good time. The one owned a business and he had a boat. And so we would go out into the Newport Beach Harbor on his boat. And we just had so much fun all the time. I used to ride my bike on the boardwalk there, and along the beach, and I would roller skate, and it was just fun, fun, fun. And I loved it. I actually baked a turkey for Thanksgiving, and all the neighbors came, and my roommates wanted the turkey baked in wine. And so I baked that turkey for 18 hours. And that turkey, we call the drunken turkey, turned out delicious. Every morsel of that turkey was gobbled up by the neighbors and my roommates, and so they loved it. They loved it. So that was my life in Newport Beach. And maybe about 6 or 8 months later, I decided to get my own apartment. And at that time I could afford it. And I got my own apartment. And that has a whole lot of other wonderful, wonderful stories to tell. And shortly after that, I met my husband. And so, yeah, stories from my life. I love to tell these little stories. Well, I hope you subscribe to my YouTube page, my YouTube channel here. And I'm building up subscribership, and I hope you enjoyed my story. And I have so many more to tell. So thank you for joining in and listening, and I hope to talk to you all soon again. So from my house to your house, God bless you, and I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye. Valentine's Day and Las Vegas, stories from my life. Valentine's Day and Las Vegas, stories from my life. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brianne. Well, you all know how I love to tell little stories from my life, and I love to hear stories from other people. So if you have a wonderful story to share, I hope you do a video and I'll listen to it, okay? Well, this story goes back many, many years. I was in my early 20s, and I had, this is long before my husband of nearly 30 years and my 3 beautiful children. So I will call the wonderful man in this story Young Doctor in Love, okay? That's a kind of a nice way to put who he was. And so I was living in the LA area, and I had developed a relationship with Young Doctor in Love, and we were both very, very much in love. And so we decided that we were going to get married. And so on a very windy, I don't know if it rained, but it was very, very windy day on February the 13th, yes, Friday the 13th, we took off for Las Vegas to get married. And it was a wonderful drive, even though it was very, very windy. And as we went into Las Vegas, all the beautiful lights were, you could see them from a distance. And I also remember that Las Vegas at that time was just really a strip. It wasn't the huge city that it is today. I think actually you could walk from one end to the other back then. Now you could not. At least I don't think I could. And so anyhow, we got to Las Vegas on Friday the 13th. And he wanted to get married. He wanted to get married on Friday the 13th. And I said, no way am I getting married on Friday the 13th. And so we waited till midnight, and it became Valentine's Day, Saturday the 14th. And so there we went to the Justice of the Peace after we got our marriage license, to the Justice of the Peace to get married. And one of the things I noticed right away is the Justice of the Peace, his last name was the same as my maiden name, which was very kind of surreal. And so we went into the Justice of the Peace chambers, and I thought, you know what, am I doing the right thing? Am I really doing the right thing? Because marriage is a huge step. It's a huge commitment. And it's got to be right because, well, it's supposed to last a lifetime and then some. And so as we're standing there getting ready to take vows, I said, excuse me, but I've got to go to the bathroom. And so I exited the chambers. I went to the bathroom. I had this beautiful silk yellow, light yellow pantsuit on that was given to a friend of mine from a very famous movie star that was given to me. And so I had that outfit on. So I went to the restroom and I stood there really contemplating what I was doing because this was a huge step. And I always believe if we have ambivalence, it's often better to err on the side of not making a decision that's permanent. And so I went back in, and I'm not going to tell you the decision that was made. I'll leave that to your imagination, and as a lot of good stories do. And I will tell you, though, the next couple of days we stayed in Las Vegas. We had a wonderful time, and had a beautiful hotel room and everything like that. We were supposed to get married at the Little Chapel of the West on Valentine's Day originally as well. So we went there and visited there. Then we went back to the LA area, and over the next few months, the relationship was having its issues, and we decided to go to Hawaii, and we went to the Big Island, the crater type of island. I think it was Kona, and we stayed at a beautiful hotel there overlooking the water. And I remember sitting outside and hearing the song, The Lady in Red. We were sitting outside in like a restaurant bar area, and it was just he and I, and the music was playing and the ocean was coming in and the stars were out. It was beautiful. And I remember looking at him knowing that our relationship was over. And so when we went back to the LA area, we stayed together for a little bit, but the relationship was over. And we broke up. And then we went back together numerous times after that, but it just didn't hold. And finally, I said, I want to call it quits, and we're done. We met in Santa Barbara. We spent the night there. It was beautiful. And the next morning, he was going north in California, and I was going back to Palm Springs. And I knew I'd never see him again. I just knew that it was over, and it was. It was truly over. And we talked on the phone. We tried to, make things work, but we knew that it wasn't going to work. And so I just called it quits, and that was it. And sometimes God works in miraculous ways, because had that relationship worked, I wouldn't have the 3 beautiful children I do today, and I wouldn't be married to the wonderful man I'm married to today. So sometimes things that don't work out is just God's hand in there, as it was for me. And so I'm so grateful for having had that experience with that person. He was an amazing person in my life at that time. And I believe that he taught me life lessons that I needed to know in preparation for my wonderful husband to come. So here I am, many years later, almost 30 years of marriage with my husband and my 3 beautiful children, and very happy that it didn't work out with the other relationship. From my house to yours, may God bless you, and I hope to talk to you soon again. The cute guy with the 100 parking tickets, summer love stories from my life. So Summer Love, the cute guy with 100 parking tickets, stories from my life. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brienne. Well, you all know I like to tell stories from my life. And so periodically I share a story, and they're true stories. They come from my life. And so this one is kind of a continuation of the story I told last night about my first apartment and the big red car, and where my mother came and whisked me away from my first apartment and took me back home due to the man in the trench coat. So you'll have to go back and look at that video. Anyhow, this one is a continuation. So a few months later, I ended up at college. Now, this is not college in California that I was to later go to. This is college about 2 hours from where we were living at the time, a southern-like town. And it was a big university. So it was summertime, and I started actually during the summer. And so it was really nice because it was kind of intimate, and everybody kind of got to know each other in the dormitories. And I had a dormitory room all to myself at that particular time. Later on, I was to share a room, which was okay, but I really liked the privacy of having my own room. And it was on the second or third level. But anyhow, one day, some friends came and they said, "Hey, we're all going to the lake. Come join us." I said, no, I have a lot of schoolwork and I really don't have the time. I've got to focus. They said, "Well, bring your books along. You can study while you're there." So they talked me into it, and I went with them. They drove. So it was a big, large group of us that ended up going. Wonderful day, beautiful day, and we were out by the lake, and everyone was playing volleyball and swimming and all that good stuff. Well, eventually I sat back down at the picnic table by myself and opened up my books. In the meantime, this really gorgeous guy came over, about a year older than me. I think I was 18, he was 19 or 20, and he just started talking to me. I kind of ignored him at first, and then I really got to really liking him. He was really cute. And so we ended up spending the day there together, and it was coming later in the day, and he said, "Well, hey, I need to go. Do you need a ride back?" Well, I did want to go back, and my friends weren't ready to leave. And so he ended up giving me a ride back. His parents had given him a brand new van. It was beautiful. And it was like a work van, and I guess it was theirs, but they let him drive it. So as we're going down the country road, back to the college, back to the dormitories, all of a sudden the police siren is in back of us, and they pull us over. And before I know it, he's in handcuffs up against the police car. The cute guy, Summer Love, he is up against the police car. And so the policeman came over and said, "We're arresting him, and can you drive his van back? Otherwise, it's going to be towed at his expense." So before I know it, I'm driving this great big van, this work van, never having driven a van before, on the country roads following the police car with my Summer Love in the back seat of the police car in handcuffs. So we get to the police station, they take him in, and I park the van, and then I follow in. And when I go to give the keys over to the officer, he says, "Well, your boyfriend says he wants to see you. You're his girlfriend." And I said, "Well, no, I just met him today. I'm not his girlfriend." "Well, he says you're his girlfriend, so he wants to see you." So they take me in the back, and there's this little window that you talk through, and I'm talking to him, and he says, "Will you be my girlfriend?" And I said, "Are you kidding?" "I'll have to think on it," which usually means no. And but he was really cute. And so he said, "Well, at least can we go out together?" I said, "Well, I'll have to think on it again." So lo and behold, I left. I never did see him again. I'm assuming that he got out of jail, paid his parking tickets, and lived happily ever after. But wow, summer love, summer romance. The cute guy, the gorgeous guy actually, with the 100 parking tickets. I'll never forget that. So if you ever get a parking ticket, you better pay it, and you better not ignore it. So anyhow, that was my little story from back when I was a college student, and I'm a college student again at age 62, but I hope I don't have any more experiences like that. You never know, stories from my life, and we all have stories to tell, and I think it's wonderful when we share our stories. So I hope you subscribe to my YouTube channel. May God bless you, and I hope to talk to you all soon again. So from my house to your house, God bless you, and I'll talk to you then.